I had the privilege just now of dropping into a few of the all of the breakout sessions, and it seemed to be some very lively conversation going on there. So let's have a brief summary from each of them, starting with Gary Smith on the environment. Gary, you've got 5 minutes. Or less.
Okay, that was easy. So we sort of broke the issues down into three groups. So I'll talk about each of those groups. So the first thing we talked about was wildlife and nature. I think it's fair to say there was unanimity within the room that nature in national parks is not as good as it should be. In fact, it's nowhere near as good as it should be. Everybody in that room believes that national parks should be doing more on nature than they are able to at the moment, and that national parks should be better than the rest of the country in terms of the nature and wildlife that you see when you go there. We are a long way from being in that position at the moment. So in order to get there, we are talking about a transformational change in the way that we do things. And I think it was put very well in our group that at the moment we are spending most of our time as a country trying to fix individual problems for individual species, often very small numbers of individual species in particular sites that are unconnected, and the whole thinking is not integrated at all. And actually we need to move away from that and wipe the slate clean really, and talk about whole landscapes and about what we can get from those landscapes and the outcomes we can achieve, whatever they might be for, rather than focusing down on so many individual bits and pieces of legislation and individual species and trying to fix them all individually, because it's not working and there's no evidence that it's going to work. On the back of that, things we talked about needing to use is a more flexible approach locally, so that we can use local expertise better than we are at the moment, the knowledge of the farmers and so on, rather than I suppose the sort of rigid systems of prescriptions we have with schemes at the moment. We talked about the need for government to give us some clarity about what it is that you want national parks to do on wildlife. We've got an 8-point plan that pretty much ignores wildlife at the moment, and so it looks like it's all about access and engagement from a government point of view. So we need to know what you want us to do on wildlife. There's an issue around the boundaries of national parks, by which I mean wildlife doesn't know they're there, those boundaries, and how do we connect with the areas around us, and what are they going to be doing while we're merrily trying to do stuff inside the national parks. And then, I suppose, obviously and fundamentally, most of the land in national parks is farmed or managed in some way for activity, and there's got to be some engagement and influencing and working with those farmers and landowners. And obviously elms is going to be a massive part of that and the way that that's designed. But we need something that will incentivise and allow us to work with farmers to achieve some shared goals, rather than spending a lot of time arguing about stuff they're not doing or should be doing or whatever. So there's a huge passion in national parks to do something about these things. We're ready to go if we get a kind of clear picture of what people want us to do on that. And obviously then you've got a very strong link to the second issue which we talked about, which was climate change. And again, there was unanimity that everything is not fine on climate change. And indeed that we as national parks should be leading the way on a lot of this stuff. In fact, pretty much everybody in the group, I think, thought, contrary to my view, that national parks should actually be leading the way on all sorts of other stuff, like public transport, like building design, like renewable energy, and all those things. So not just about land management, not just about peatland and woodland, but the whole thing, and being an exemplar about the kinds of things that you could do. That's a big challenge to get there. And again, we started down that route 15 years ago. With sustainable development funds and all sorts of things, and austerity and everything else has meant that a lot of that stuff's just kind of gone away really, and we've got to get that back. But again, I think we're looking for a bit of a steer to government about how far they want us to go down that line. The mechanism we thought for getting there really was in effect having a net zero plan for each national park. So how are you going to get there? What the main elements of that are? How many hectares of woodland? How much peatland are you going to restore? How do you get to those things? Let's get those costed up, and then we can start having a sensible discussion with government about actually whether there's resources there to actually do it, if anyone's serious about doing it. But at least each of us then would have something that was specific and we could engage people with. And then a lot of stuff about facilitating people to just kind of change behaviour. Yeah, and using our, I suppose, our national role and the visitors that we have to be able to kind of spread those messages so they go out beyond the national parks as well. And the last bit that we touched on, again, very closely related, was this question that Tony raised about how do we engage with people on these issues and get them to buy into it. And there's two different groups that we were talking about there. First of all, obviously, we've got the visitors, the general public, the taxpayers, who we're asking to fund all this stuff, and we have to try and engage with them. And then the second audience is all those people that own and manage the land in the national parks, because we have to engage with them as well. And there was a very strong feeling that there is an opportunity now. Opportunities generally come with bad things, don't they? So we've got a climate emergency, we've got a wildlife emergency, and those two things are an opportunity for us, particularly for connecting with younger audiences, to really kind of try and use those messages, all of us, consistently, to get people to engage with national parks and why we need better wildlife in national parks and why we need to be restoring peatland, why we need to be planting trees, and all of that stuff. And a lot of that's about engaging with schools, obviously, and about stuff that got touched on earlier in terms of education and so on. And a lot of the delivery is going to come down to having systems in place for us to work with the landowners, farmers, through incentives and all sorts of other things to change behaviour and actually change the way the land's managed. Stopped, Tom.
Very good, thank you. Julie, would you like to take the floor?
Yes,
I think you were on young people and access.
Thank you very much. We had a really lively group with lots of different opinions, but thank you very much for all the contributions. One of the things that was made first, one of the points that was made first, was the connections between the presentations. And I'm sure that was deliberate, but the points about lack of education and about all of these issues, how that then affects your health, the lack of understanding with young people, and then the barriers that creates. So really, people felt that was a really cohesive message all the way through. We mentioned education, and there were some concerns about it is important that it has to be with education first, but that pace of change is sometimes slow to get things into the curriculum. So there are other organisations, Duke of Edinburgh Scouts, others that we maybe need to work with closer as well as we already do now. Things out of school, not just in school, but not giving up obviously on the education in school. And there was a feeling about who's occupying the space to actually take all this action forward. And it was felt that young people are not always represented on the parks. Young people should be represented. There are examples around the country, around the UK, but we need to be given a space where they can have the majority of the room. So not a small space, one or two people, they own the room, and then they have the opportunity to get across their messages. So there are youth forums, there are other vehicles for that, but it's about giving them the space to do it. There was a message about complacency, came across a little bit about, the conference, we've got to take action. The message was about this, was about doing things. We must do things. And it's about us taking leadership as individuals forward. That's not always easy, but that's part of what we need to do. There was a message about Secretary of State appointments, of which I'm one, and it was mentioned male and middle age, so I hope that isn't me, actually, but about bringing more young people through the Secretary of State system. And, we need to get other people through that can go onto the boards, but there were other ways around that as well. Co-opt young people onto the boards, give them a topic to speak about at meetings, so give them the floor. But it's also about recruitment, making sure we get young people through the recruitment system into the national parks, and work around legislation. So find ways we can actually do what we need to do and work around the legislation to an extent. It's about change of mindset and creating a movement, so it's giving people where they've got the passion, not to always operate like a local authority, which a lot of us do, and there's nothing wrong with that for those who are local authority members, etc. But it's important to create something different and give young people that opportunity. Communicating the values of what we're about as national parks, broadcasting that to try and engage people who are not engaged at the moment, and also about the partnerships, which we all work in, but to really work those hard. It's about things like social media we've talked about, but young people don't always just want to do it on social media. They want to be involved as well. So it's about making something appropriate to the young person individually to engage with the parks and get involved. The other points that were made as we moved through the session were about making sure that we can work with people locally, but also work with people in cities. But it's also about developing a brief with young people, not giving them something to do or telling them what to do. So working very closely with them. And it's about working with colleges, universities, primary schools. So it's at all levels that we need to really make that effort. And I wonder how many of us actually do that. There were some in our group that do it already, but I don't know how many of us individually do that. Service design was mentioned. Can we not always think about the person and the people we're directing that at and work with young people and others in actually everything that we do in the national parks? And the final point, which I thought was a really fundamental one, we all go after funding, we all put funding bids together. Put funding bids together to involve young people in actually delivering the projects. So not just apprentices, but actually delivery of all the sorts of projects we want to put in place. And I thought that was a really final, powerful point to end on. Thank you.
And, Judith Donovan on health.
Well, we decided to put our money where William's mouth is, so we held a standing meeting outside, which also helped my hangover. I wouldn't say we were in violent agreement, but I think the trend of the conversation was not controversial, and it was actually very honest, because we actually started off by saying we have probably been too elitist in our approach, because what we have done is we have thought that there's something very special about parks, which there is, and therefore there's something very special about the people who run the parks, which there is, but therefore that somehow means that we can be more superior in terms of how we decide to outreach to them. And it was pointed actually that we're them. So we need to really start thinking differently about how we approach this stuff. Because if we're actually going to help the health of the nation, which is what William was talking about, you know, we can't be pressing around on the edges with small schemes. It's much more important than that. There's a big debate about, do we try and find more innovative ways of getting them to us, or do we actually turn the thing on its head and take us to them? And there was quite a lot of support for the concept of community national parks, whether they're mini hubs, green halos, but that concept that a national park doesn't have to stay within the boundaries of the 1949 Act, because we can be a concept, we can be a movement, and movements move both ways. We're not just a place, we're not just a bit of the map. And we think particularly in the digital world, that's got a lot of power, because obviously digital means the universe is yours, and we could actually go a very long way with that. Digital, of course, takes us to the young people, and we've already heard that young people are a particularly critical audience to reach, because that's your future. Get them, you get future generations. But the point was made very fairly that we must not forget the older people, because we have this very large cohort of people getting older with a lot of issues to do with loneliness and isolation, and also mental health, which is the very big issue at the moment. And of course that is ageless, so we do actually need to not look as though we're only wanting to talk to young trendy people. That would be inappropriate. We can't do it on our own. We need to do it in partnership, and partnership are level concepts. It's not, hello, we're the national park, we're going to deign to talk to you, because actually people we need to partner are actually bigger and nastier than us, like Public Health England. So, but we do need to work with the people who've got the money, we do need to work with the people who've got the agendas, and we do need to say we can be part of your solution. And somebody put it very nicely, we're actually in the supply chain of a journey to a healthier nation. So we can't do it on our own. We need to be in that supply chain in a partnership mould. That's very, very important. So particularly schools, particularly the health establishment. But we also said, let's not forget about looking closer to home. Our members, Julie made the point. We have a lot of members who come from local authorities. They don't necessarily all come with the same degree of enthusiasm. For some, it's just another one of those jobs the council gives them. Some come because they're very passionate about their community, and particularly in the planning areas. But we perhaps need to encourage our members to more explicitly go back to their councils and say, how can we have a broader conversation, and how can we work in partnership? Because sometimes those councils are outside the park, not just in it, and that could be the start of moving out to some of these mini hubs or these smaller community national parks. And we also need to know the residents, Because we spend a lot of our time telling the residents we're nice people and we're not trying to make their lives more difficult. But do we challenge them? Do we say, you're bloody lucky to live in a national park? When did you last tell somebody? Go and get one of your mates who's not in the national park, take him for a walk. You know, and somebody raised an interesting point that I hope William takes away, which is we need a cohort study to see if we can prove if the health of the residents in the parks is better than the health of the rest of the country, because that would be a very interesting point to prove, would it not? We also discussed the fact that there are 15 of us, and whilst we're all different and ultimately the solutions have to suit our area and our profile, we have to do more about harnessing the 15 as a body. And definitely more. There needs to be more of a framework within which all this work fits, so the people who do our national stuff for us can go and have a more coherent conversation. You know, whether it's with government or big corporates in the private sponsorship area, we've got to look as though we've got a joined-up thinking and a joined-up action plan which is delivered with that lovely local content. That's very, very important. And it was also pointed out that possibly we might actually need to start telling people what a national park is, because apparently some of the sponsorship conversations that found themselves talking to somebody thought they were a national trust. And maybe we just take it for granted people know what a national park is. So maybe there's a bit of back to basics in marketing, communications, how we promote the brand, which of course again is where digital can come in. Because if we could franchise this concept, and if we want to make the nation healthy, we probably ought to franchise this concept. So if I was going to, in conclusion, say what I thought we'd discuss, we basically said, you know, let's outside in, upside down, and the 3 Ps. Let's move from place towards people and stop being so bloody precious.
Thank you very much indeed. And if I can encourage actually you three, I think, to vacate the seats now, because we're bringing up the others for discussion. I must say, if I ever thought this meeting was going to be fuddy-duddy, I've had this thoroughly bashed out of me. I've got fresh air as a hangover cure. I had someone talking about bogs and trees on acid in one of the meetings the other day. And we've now had the idea of actually kidnapping people from the cities and bringing them to the national park. So it's... there's nothing timid about this group, I'll say that for you.